So you see, the question then that I have for you is, what are you living for? And then secondly, what is this overwhelming evidence that convinces you that whatever it is you're living for is reliable?
Well, I would say that I don't believe there is like an ultimate meaning in the first place, so I can choose my own way to live.
Right.
And if it's relative, then there's nothing you can say that's wrong.
Correct. Which means you have something. I'm convinced that takes a creator. That takes some type of supernatural being to bring something out of nothing. And I am convinced also that it takes an intelligent mind to put matter together and energy together in such a way that you've got life. The idea that that just happens by chance, there's no evidence to support that.
I mean, there is evidence. You can take just a certain amount of chemicals that would just happen to be laying around, and if they're collected together in such a way, and the universe is a huge superset, so like there's a bunch of possibilities that can happen. Like you can see that these things take on lifelike characteristics. So yeah, I would say it is possible. Maybe unlikely, but it is possible.
Yep. And it's possible that I could wake up in the morning with $1 million in my right pocket.
You could.
I could. But if I base my life on that, I would argue I'm being very stupid.
You would, but at the same time, you're not taking into account how massive the universe is. Like when you study probability, if you say that the works of if you do random letters, the works of Shakespeare is going to come up in the first 1,000 letters, you're kind of a fool. But one of the things about probability you understand is, given enough time, every works of Shakespeare will come up in the exact order that it was written.
Good, okay.
And the universe, I believe, is huge enough, massive on a scale that it's hard to even like imagine that certain chemicals could just happen to come together and bring about lifelike properties.
But if you believe in the Big Bang, you know that the universe doesn't have eternity to produce life. You know that the universe came about 15 billion years ago. So you've got a limited amount of time, 15 billion years, for life to come about by chance. Now, if you and I and someone else are playing poker, and I'm dealing, and 10 times in a row, I deal a perfect hand to myself, if you begin to say, Cliff, I think you're cheating, that's impossible for you to deal 10 hands, all perfect for yourself. And if I say to you, there are multiple numbers of universes, and we just happen to live in the universe where I can deal 10 perfect hands of poker for myself, I think you'll, if you're a Texan, be reaching for your 6-shooter to blow me away for taking all your money away from you. I don't think you're going to say, oh yeah, right, there are a multiple number of universes, there's an infinite amount of time, so I buy the line that you can deal 10 perfect hands of poker cards to yourself in a row. I think you know that that is highly implausible, and what is far more plausible is I'm cheating you out of your money.
No, and I agree. It is possible that you dealt yourself 10 perfect hands. I would never say that, oh, you dealt yourself 10 perfect hands. You were cheating, definitely, without a doubt. I would have some kind of investigation. I would probably check your sleeves and stuff like that and gather some more evidence. I'm not just going to, like, blindly accuse you. That would be unfair.
All right. Let's say I dealt 50 perfect hands of cards.
Once again, possible.
Really? How about 100?
Possible.
How about 200?
Possible.
Okay. I don't think you can live your life that way.
I try to.
You can't.
I try.
Prove to me that this fine university is going to give you a diploma on your day of graduation. Prove to me that on your day of graduation, this fine university is not going to say, hey, we're going to break tradition. No diplomas this year. Can you prove that?
I can't prove it. I have a pretty good idea of what they're going to do, though.
Good. You see, sir, you don't base your life on proof. You base your life on evidence.
I agree.
And you cannot get irrevocable, watertight proof. As a thinking human being, you base your life on evidence. That's what I do. I think that's what the majority of us do who treasure our minds. We're not so naive to think I can prove something. Rather, we look for evidence, and then we ask ourselves, what is most plausible? What is most reasonable in light of the evidence? I can't prove God exists. I can't even prove I exist. Maybe I'm just a bad dream you're having. It is possible. But the overwhelming evidence is I do exist, and the overwhelming evidence is, in a different way, God exists. Not the proof, but the evidence.
Okay, so what is the evidence for God?
The evidence for God is design demands a designer. 100 times out of 100, in my experience of life, a delicious meal points to a chef. A shirt points to a tailor. Mount Rushmore does not point to water dripping down over rocks and carving out George and Teddy and Thomas's face. 100 times out of 100, the BMW points to a mechanic. The building points to an architect and a builder. Never in my observation do you get order and design by chance. It demands a designer. Second piece of evidence. The fact that if oxygen comprised 25% of this atmosphere, fires would erupt all over the place. If it comprised 15%, we'd all suffocate. The fact that it comprises 21%, which is exactly what allows us to sustain life, demands some type of intelligent mind. That type of precision, that we have a life-sustaining planet instead of a life-defeating planet, demands some type of intelligent mind. Thirdly, the amount of densely packed information in a single cell, the DNA of a single cell, demands some type of intelligent mind for me. If you and I are walking up and down the beach and we come to ripples in the sand, and you say, hey Cliff, how'd those ripples get there? And I say, obviously because of the waves. That's cool. We keep walking down, we see in the sand, John loves Mary. You say, hey Cliff, how'd that get there? And I say, obviously the waves. Why is that ridiculous? Because densely packed information in the message, John loves Mary, cannot come about as a result of the waves washing over the sand. It demands an intelligent mind. So there's more information in the DNA of a single cell than there's information in 3 sets of the 30-volume Encyclopedia Britannica. It points me to some type of intelligent mind. So those are 3 pieces of evidence that point to God. I could keep going, but why don't you speak now?
Okay, first I want to go ahead and about the one about the Earth being like a perfect place to like habit life. We've found hundreds of planets in our galaxy, in the tiny little space of our galaxy, that have the same same type of atmosphere, same size planet, all that kind of stuff. We've found planets that have the same kind of properties that Earth has, Earth-like planets. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's not that out of the ordinary for Earth to just pop up out of nowhere. Do you want to refute that, or?
Well, yeah. First of all, I'd love to find out about where these other planets are that are life-sustaining like Earth is. I'm just curious.
I'm not saying they're sustaining life. I'm saying they're life-like, or they're Earth-like. Like you're saying, like there's 21% oxygen, a bunch of nitrogen, all that kind of stuff. We found planets that have that same kind of makeup.
But isn't it true that I would never want you to take your spacesuit off if you're on that planet?
I mean, if we study the atmosphere, we notice the atmosphere is like Earth. We could probably just take our helmets off. It'd be cool.
Really?
Yeah, that's why we say they're Earth-like planets. We can't get to them yet, obviously.
Where are these planets? Where are these planets?
They're in our galaxy, a very small sliver of our galaxy we've been able to study. We've found these planets.
All right, great. That still doesn't change my point, that when you study how life is balanced on a razor's edge on this planet, it demands an intelligent mind. I don't care how many planets there are out there that have similar. I would argue those planets have been created that way as well then, if they're life-sustaining. I mean, if you can go onto those planets and suck wind the way you do on here and live, and have the whole life process continue on, it's incredible. Because please don't go to the moon and take your helmet off.
I will, I promise.
Good.
But I'm just saying, like you say that the life balanced on a razor edge, life as we know it, our carbon-based life forms, as we know it, as humans, as tigers and bugs and all that kind of stuff, they require this type of atmosphere. That doesn't mean other life can require some kind of extreme atmosphere.
I agree.
So why are you saying life balances on a razor's edge when it could definitely be on a much wider range?
Well, the whole point is, your life and my life cannot be sustained on a planet where oxygen comprises 30% of the atmosphere. Fires would break out all over the place, we'd all burn to death. And if oxygen comprised 10% of our atmosphere, we'd all suffocate. So, I mean, it is so precise. I mean, think about Jupiter. The gravitational field of Jupiter sucks in all these comets and asteroids headed straight to smack planet Earth. It's an amazing vacuum cleaner, Jupiter is, and it protects us in an amazing way. Think about if the Earth spun more quickly on its axis. There wouldn't be life as we know it on this planet. So, I mean, the amazing balance of nature that sustains life, it demands some type of intelligent mind, doesn't it?
It sustains our life, but I mean, it doesn't require an intelligent mind. I'm just saying, what makes our life so special that it has to balance on that razor's edge?
All right. I have a brother who's a transplant surgeon. He transplants kidneys and livers down at Emory University Hospital, or over at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. I can promise you, sir, he has gone through the most stringent academic courses in order to be able to transplant livers and kidneys. And if you need a liver transplant, I would encourage you not to go to someone who lives down on the drag to have them transplant. I would encourage you instead to turn to someone who has studied the amazing, intricate order and design of the human body and who can pull off that transplant in such a way that you're going to live instead of die of kidney or liver failure. Now, people love to say to me, oh, there's not that much order and design in the human body. You see, the reason that I almost feel like calling them either inconsistent or an intellectual hypocrite is because you know very, very well that if you get sick enough, you're not going down to someone on the drag for help. You're going to the most highly trained doctor you can possibly find who understands the order and design of your body and who can correct the disorder that has occurred. That's my point.
Okay, that doesn't tell me why our life is special, why it has to hang on that razor's edge. You're saying our life is complicated to understand for us. You think a worm understands how its heart beats?
What does that have to do with anything we've been talking about?
Okay, it could be very complex to us how like we have to go to school for 10 plus years to understand how to do a liver transplant. How do we know there's not something else that just looks at us like, oh, hey, look, idiots trying to take out their liver again. And they can just do it as soon as they're born. And it's the same relative step from a worm to human to some other kind of life.
All right. If you have liver failure, I can promise you, you're not going to look at me and say it's relative. If you have liver failure and if you're on your way out of here, you know very, very well that you need a new liver in order to live.
I agree.
And you're going to have a doctor do that transplant who has studied very carefully the order and design of the human body. You're not just going to let anybody mess with your liver, I hope.
I understand that, but I'm just saying, maybe we're not as smart as we think we are.
Oh, I agree with that. We are definitely not as smart as we think we are. A bunch of us are intellectual, arrogant twits. There's no question about it. But, sir, you can't deny the fact that there is amazing, intricate order and design to the human body. And you prove that you realize that when you don't go to the person on the strip to heal you. You go to a hospital. You go to the most highly trained doctor you can possibly get. Why? Because this thing is intricate. Really intricate. All right. Does intricate order and design come about by chance?
I don't think it's necessarily that complex, us. Like I'm saying, we could be the simplest, we could be very simple. Like, we only think it's complex, that's all we know. It's the most complex thing we've been able, or one of the most complex things we've been able to study. There's still so much we don't know about the universe. Like, we only know about 5% of what the universe is made of.
Uh-huh.
The other stuff is just blind. We have no idea what it is.
Right.
We call it dark energy, dark matter. It's nothing to do with energy. We have nothing to do with matter. We just call it that because why not?
Okay.
So the fact that we can only understand a tiny little percentage of the universe, stuff that we haven't even seen, we just think, like, hey, this is what 5% of the universe is probably made up of.
Right.
Lets me know that we may not know what we're talking about all the time.
Okay. Okay, now just listen to what you're saying. And now consider me answering your question, why do I believe God exists, by saying, we know so little of all there is to reality, God must exist. I cannot live my life that way.
I'm glad.
I cannot do what you're doing to me, which is, we know so little that we got to just say God doesn't exist, because we got to realize that science is eventually going to be able to answer all our questions. That, for me, is intellectual dishonesty. Yes, we agree. We don't know everything. We know less than 1% of all there is to know, I'm convinced. But we got to do the best job we can with the evidence we have. We've got to use not these genius minds we have, but these amazing minds to look for evidence and then to ask ourselves what is most reasonable, what is most plausible, not what can we prove, but what is most reasonable, what is most plausible in light of the evidence. Okay, so I think we've moved from atheism to agnosticism, right? Okay, now, here's my problem with agnosticism. It's impossible to live out. What does that mean? Tonight, you will put your head on your pillow, I'll put my head on my pillow. Like it or not, you're living for something, I'm living for something. In other words, we have motive, we have ambition, we have priorities, we have drives and desires. Okay, now all you got to do is take your motives, push them back to their origin, and you'll find out what you worship. In other words, what you consider ultimately worthy. If you consider money ultimately worthy, you will get the best education you have, very specifically to make the most money you can. If you value education as ultimately worthy, you will live for your rational mind to be the most brilliant postdoc student you can be, and professor or whatever. If you live for physical pleasure, if that's the bottom line for you, then you will be the classic hedonist, and you'll live to stimulate your nerve endings. But you see, my question is, what's the evidence that the ultimate purpose of life is to make money, to have pleasure, to be smart? Now, Jesus says the ultimate purpose in life is to love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And you can use money, and you can enjoy sex within the context of a lifelong commitment, and you are responsible to use your rational mind because it's a precious gift from God, so you better not dabble in the irrational. You better think hard and straight. And you see, that worldview makes so much more sense than the options. But the idea that you can go to sleep and say, well, I don't believe anything's worth living for, means that you will not get up tomorrow morning. Which is why Albert Camus, the great atheistic existentialist philosopher, pointed out, the only question modern man must answer is, why not commit suicide? In other words, why get up tomorrow morning if life is ultimately meaningless? But you see, obviously, you're going to create some meaning. All right, we all do, right? Or else we accept the fact that God created us for a purpose. So you see, the question then that I have for you is, what are you living for? And then secondly, what is this overwhelming evidence that convinces you that whatever it is you're living for is reliable?
Well, I would say that I don't believe there is like an ultimate meaning in the first place, so I can choose my own way to live.
Right.
And if it's relative, then there's nothing you can say that's wrong.
Correct. Which means tomorrow morning when you get up, if you figure out how to steal money from people, or if you figure out how to help hurting people, it ultimately doesn't matter, because it's whatever you choose, right? Okay, now, if you begin to think about that deeply enough, you begin to realize, whoa, this life is a crapshoot. And then you have to...
For you, meaning is still an arbitrary thing, but it arbitrarily comes from God. Would you say that's right?
No.
What's God's reason for giving us that meaning?
I would say that because an intelligent being created you to reflect his glory, rationality, conscience, creativity, love, that you have an innate value that comes from the eternal God. Secondly, because you're not pond scum evolved to a higher order, because you've been created for a purpose to love and worship God and to love and serve others, your life really does have significance.
It still sounds like God arbitrarily has decided that what our meaning is and told us that that is what makes our life meaningful. Whether we personally would, whether that meaning would make us happy. Like, for example, to praise God for eternity wouldn't make me happy. That seems like a pretty meaningless existence, and a really long one, too.
Okay, good. Great point. Have you ever been in love with a woman? When you were in love with a woman, did you praise her?
A little, I guess.
When you praised her, was that boring, dull, and monotonous?
Well, I would say no, because I didn't do it for eternity.
Okay. when I communicate love to my wife and praise her, and love to my sons and praise them, I can promise you, sir, that is the antithesis of boring, drab, and dull. Instead, that is the zenith, that is the appropriate expression of my love. And I love to watch a big, tough football player fall in love with a little petite girl, woman. And I love to watch him stumble all over himself and almost drool at the mouth, praising her. At times it sounds like sentimental slop. But I can promise you, if I look that big guy in the face who's not very articulate and who's stumbling all over himself and drooling at the mouth to communicate his love, and I say, pretty dull, isn't it? He'd say, you gotta be kidding me. I really love this person, and praise is the appropriate expression of my love. So, sir, I can promise you the only reason I praise God is because I love him, which means my praising God is the antithesis of boring, drab, and dull.
Okay, that might be a difference between you and I.
You bet.
I would find that to be pretty boring. And a God that really creates a bunch of people and then tells them that their meaning is to praise him, I don't think reflects very well on God himself.
Oh, okay. Well, the first point is, God doesn't create us simply to sit around saying, I praise you, I praise you, I praise you for eternity. Instead, in heaven, we will be working. We will be serving. We will be exercising creativity. We will be gregariously building relationships, both with God and with others. So I would encourage you to ask yourself, what brings me the most joy in life?
Are there going to be an infinite number of people in heaven? Because eternity is like a really long time to build relationships. And it seems like the way heaven is thought of is it's pretty finite, and it just seems like it'd get really boring after a while. Especially if there is a God who is omniscient and knows everything, which I think that the only way you can know that you know everything is if, you know, the universe is finite. So heaven just seems really boring to me. But that's kind of a tangent. Back to the main issue, meaningfulness. I still don't see how a God in the sky telling us what meaning, what the meaning of life is would make life more meaningful than us having a natural sense of the meaning of life. Even if we can't really say, you know, we can ask, well, why is that meaningful? Why is that meaningful ad infinitum? And eventually it just is meaningful. And I would say, you know, because it evolved that way. Why would a mysterious individual, through an ancient group of people and through current evangelical types, telling us what makes life meaningful, why would that be more meaningful than evolution telling us what is meaningful about life?
Okay, what does evolution tell you is the meaning of life?
Well, I would say that the ultimate meaning of life is to replicate yourself and do it better than the next guy. And I would say that human altruism is an evolved trait because that is actually adaptive for people in groups, for a political species like ourselves. So the kindness and the love that we feel for each other is an adaptive trait, because a person where everyone around them trusts them as someone who loves them, I would say is in a safer position than somebody that nobody trusts. So it's actually a really adaptive quality. And a lot of research has gone into trying to understand these things like love and feelings of altruism and behaviors that just morality itself, and it can be explained evolutionarily. And evolution is something that has been documented very well. It's really a fact of nature, and it can't be denied anymore. And so it's a very good paradigm for explaining design in the universe. And so I would say that that would be a better naturalistic explanation of the meaningfulness of life than another arbitrary source of meaning, which is a God as defined by an ancient book and some evangelical types. What do you say to that?
I say that although producing babies is fun and good, there's got to be more to life than producing babies. I say that if you're going to be consistent with your worldview,
But to be fair, I wasn't
altruism-
just saying that producing babies was the only.
no, that was your first
evolved.
point, and I'm going on to your second point.
Okay.
And your second point was that altruism makes sense because it helps people trust you. Well, guess what? I could give a rip about whether you trust me or not. I've got 60 to 80 years to live on this planet. I want as much money in order to take as many vacations and buy as many boats and go on many ski trips as I can. And I think that's precious that you think altruism is nice. But if it's true that I've got 60 to 80 years and then the fertilizer pit, for me it's far more rational to get as much as I can and to have as much fun as I can.
Okay, an important, like, I think anybody would agree that the most, like, having the most fun, getting a lot of stuff does make people feel good, but the love of other people makes them feel better. And I think that that's something that people dedicate a lot of resources just because it makes them feel good. And it has a biochemical effect in our minds that evolved as a reinforcement of that behavior because it makes you feel good. And I think that, okay, so that's kind of mysterious. Why do we feel good when we do nice things for people and when they reciprocate? That can be explained evolutionarily. We don't need a God to explain that. And whereas in the pre-evolution time of our history, the way we explained that reality along with a lot of other reality was with positing an agency behind it, an intelligence behind it to explain it. But we don't need that anymore because we actually have a very robust, good mechanism that can develop that same type of thing.
If there is no God, I think that B.F. Skinner and the behaviorists win the story, win the day. If there is no God, I am simply complex biochemical reactions evolved to a higher order, which means there is no such thing as an intangible value of love. There are certain biochemical reactions that I have in my brain that I happen to call love, which means love is not a free decision. Love is a biochemical reaction in my brain, and I just do what I am biochemically predisposed to do.
Yeah.
My experience of life contradicts that. The life that I live is, I am very, very sorely tempted to hate and cut the knees out from underneath people who hurt me deeply. I am hardwired to seek revenge,
And
not to forgive, not to love my enemy. My experience of life is that I can choose to follow my conscience instead of following my instinct, the voices that are going off in my head when someone hurts me. Rocky, Rocky, Rocky. Blast that rascal into the next century. I can follow that, or I can follow forgiving my enemy, forgiving the person who has cut me off at the knees. And I can promise you, sir, that is an intense struggle that I go through on a fairly regular basis.
okay, and you know, I think it would be overstating to say every attribute of our personality is genetic. The fundamental attributes of our personality are genetic, but the bulk of our personality is a learned thing that we learn from our culture and our society that we develop in. But that's still a physical phenomenon. And to say, you know, love is non-physical, anyway, that's, you can't demonstrate that. I mean, you can demonstrate brain damage that destroys a person's ability to love. And, well, I think I should leave it at that. I think there is just overwhelming evidence that our personality is an attribute of the brain. And, I mean, nobody without a brain
Can love.
Can love, sure.
Good. Okay, and that's where you and I part company. I am convinced that if you did a lobotomy on me, you could radically alter my behavior. I am convinced that if you injected chemicals in my body, you could radically alter my behavior. Yes, I agree with you. We have physical bodies, and by altering the brain chemically or through surgery, you can radically change a person's personality. No question about that. My point is simply this. When you finish writing up the chemical analysis of the human brain, you have not told the whole story. There still is a soul, a person, a me, an I, that can stand back and judge how I respond to my genetic makeup, how I respond to my environment. In fact, I have the utmost respect for people who contradict their culture, contradict the environment they grew up in. Be it a Gandhi, a Dr. Martin Luther King. Obviously, they chose to follow their conscience instead of their culture, their environment. And that's what I experience.
Well, Gandhi was educated in England.
Yeah, but he still was incredibly self-reflective, acknowledging that when he lived in South Africa, he adopted racist attitudes. And finally, Gandhi thought through his racist attitudes and realized that was really wrong of me. And he moved out of that racism. So he had a tremendous ability to follow his conscience instead of following the cultural status quo. I respect that. I trust all of us respect that highly. And obviously, white America was saying, shut up, King, down, black boy, get back in place. And Dr. King said, I am not going to blow you away with a gun, but I will peacefully stand against racism, oppressing a human being created in the image of God. And by the way, you white Christians, you need to take your Jesus more seriously. You don't need to shelve Jesus and get rid of him. Instead, you need to take the Jesus you say you believe in more seriously and realize that in the parable of the Good Samaritan, he makes a direct frontal attack on racism, and you better break with your culture. You better break with the environment you were raised in. And you better learn to respect all people of all ethnic heritages, because we're all created in the image of God. That was his whole argument. Well, we respect that, don't we?
Our ethics really have evolved from the Old Testament time when it was okay to kill women and children if your God said it was okay.
No, it was not.
Yeah, he commanded the Israelites to kill women and children in Jericho. That was a commandment. Nothing alive was to remain afterwards.
And what was Jericho?
It was a Canaanite city.
It was a fort. They marched
with
around it
women
7
and
times.
Children in it.
Pardon?
It had women and children
No,
in
it had Rahab in there, who was a tavern keeper and a prostitute.
It had women and children. The commandment was to kill everything.
Yes.
Man, woman, and child.
That's right.
That's a commandment from God, and that was evil. That was an evil commandment from God. Nowadays, we all feel that that's evil. There was a time not too long ago when it was considered sanctioned by God to own other people. But we've progressed beyond that. How have we progressed beyond that? That's a really interesting question. I think that it probably stems from our natural feelings of empathy that a lot of us have. And I think that has been built up as a moral philosophy. But Christianity has been there from the beginning, and all it has done is reflected the cultural morality of its time.
Is that what William Wilberforce did?
Yes, he was a Christian like almost everybody else, but Christianity has been used to support evil and good at the same time.
Yes.
Just because it's only reflecting the cultural morality at the time.
I totally disagree.
So you
the
can
vast
use it
majority
to
of Christians
justify
are
anything.
in China and Asia, South America and Africa today. They are not Christians because mom and dad were. They are breaking with their culture and following Jesus Christ in a new way. That is why Christianity, the center of Christianity, has moved from Jerusalem and Antioch down to northern Africa, up to Western Europe and the United States, and now the United States and the West are no longer the center of Christianity. Rather, the center of faith in Jesus Christ is in Asia, Africa, and South America. There are far more followers of Christ there.
Yeah, but still, these cultures in Asia are a lot more moral now and they're largely atheistic or at least non-Christian, they are orders of magnitude more moral now than Christian cultures 200 years ago were.
That tells you nothing about Jesus Christ. It tells you something
Sure.
about Christianity. I think you'd be a fool to put your faith in Christianity. Christianity's
is
been used
people,
to
yeah.
justify the Crusades, the Inquisition, Salem witch trials, racism, but Jesus Christ justifies none of that. And when you put your faith in Christ, the way so many Africans, so many Asians, so many South Americans are, it radically changes your life, not so that you become part of the Salem witch hunt or the Crusades or the Inquisition, but rather that you learn to love people and respect people. Why? Because they're created in the image of God.
Okay, well, I think I better
You
let
bet.
the next guy,
Take
but
care.
thanks.